John McDonnell.
Yep.
Thank you. Can I just say on this side of the House, and I think on all sides of the House, we take pride in the Honourable Gentleman's expertise, the Honourable Gentleman from East Ham, because time and time again, as a result of him being the Chair of the Select Committee, he's warned this House on all sides at times about the approach that needs to be taken if we're going to have a stable social security and pensions regime. And I pay tribute to the work that he does. I am an ardent advocate of the coalition government's policy on triple lock, which seems somewhat ironic about the history of this. And I do so because just the historical background of this is that I was a total opponent of Mrs Thatcher's breaking of the link between pensions and earnings. And to be frank, the state pension still hasn't recovered from the breaking of that link. I was elected in 1997. At the end of the Conservative rule in 1997, the basic state pension would have been 50% higher in value if Mrs Thatcher had not broken that earnings link in 1980. And successively in 1997, I prepared alternative budgets to the new Labour budgets. Actually, Gordon Brown had a sense of humour about him and was on a platform with him recently when he said, when I was a Shadow Chancellor, he said, well, actually, he's always been the Shadow Chancellor because I was producing alternative budgets to him. And in every alternative budget, I put the restoration of the link between earnings and pensions. And I did so because the breaking of that link started to undermine the progress that we'd seen up until then about improving the state pension and lifting pensioners out of poverty. But even that's why I was a strong supporter of the triple lock when the coalition government introduced it. But despite a decade of the triple lock, the basic state pension would still only be 37% higher if the earnings link had been maintained. And that means, I'll just give the figure, this means that today a single pension on the basic state pension would have been £2,662 a year better off, and a pensioner couple would have been £4,277 better off a year if the link hadn't been broken by Mrs Thatcher all those years ago. And the figures from Age UK now on pensioner poverty is that there are 2.1 million pensioners living in poverty in our country at the moment, and that's up 1.6 million from in 2014. That's a 30% increase. And what's interesting about this is, and not shocking to some in this House, is that the majority of those living in poverty, in pensioner poverty, are women. In addition to that, pensioners from black and Asian communities are around twice as likely to be living in poverty. And what I find interesting is some of the individual examples we can bring to the House about what that means. I remember when energy prices rose last time in my constituency. I had a constituent who used her bus pass to stay on the bus all day to keep warm. And that wasn't infrequent, those stories about the reasons that people were living in such fuel poverty. And I just remind the House that this year fuel bills are increasing on average £139, and they're expecting to rise again next year. So I just predict we'll have more of our constituents, our pensioner constituents, going cold this winter, and if we're not careful, in future winters as well, especially as has been said, inflation now likely to be 4%, some are even predicting 5%. And I just wondered, what is this row all about? Because I support these amendments. I would have given the 8% because I don't believe that you break the principle of the manifesto commitment in those circumstances. And I believe the additional top-up would have worked. But if we are talking about the Altman Amendment, which is moving towards a 5% increase, the government will award a 3%. So the difference we're talking about, the argument, is about £2.75p a week. Or even if we went to the full amount of the 8%, it would only be an additional £7 a week between the 3% and the 8%. Are we really having a row in this House about robbing pensioners of £2.75p a week? I just find it I just find it unbelievable that we can even contemplate that. Can I also say that, look, I've heard that the range of costings that have been made. I just looked at the DWP estimates about the Altman Amendment, and that said it would cost 1.3 billion in 22-23, and that was in comparison with the operating with prices. I was in the House a few weeks ago. 1.3 billion we're talking about and arguing about for additional amount to pensioners, when actually there was a 25 billion corporate tax break given away by the Chancellor in a budget recently, which will be 12.5 billion next year. And I have to say also that this issue about calculations, the ONS made it clear their estimate on earnings growth in the 12-month period, May to July, was anything, as the Minister said, anything between 3.6% to 5.1%. And the argument now is that somehow these figures are not robust enough. Can I just say we've had example after example in this House where the government has plucked figures out of the air. And the Minister also said that, in addition to that, there isn't sufficient consensus. Well, if the party opposite agrees, we can build consensus. And you know, when I was in local government, you always, for a rational decision, you always use those Wednesbury principles, that you take into account all relevant factors and dismiss all irrelevant ones. I think if we were coming to a decision tonight in terms of the Wednesbury principles of rational behaviour, it would be on the basis, the choice between arriving at a statistic that is completely agreed by everyone as against leaving pensioners in poverty next year and not being able to afford their energy bills. And can I have to say, it just doesn't cut the mustard, to be honest. The honourable gentleman referred to the calculation when the government wanted to buy off the Unionists in Northern Ireland. Figures were just plucked out of the air like that. The level in which pay awards are being imposed at the moment across departments has no rational basis about the work or the productivity of those individual workers. So I think this is a question about whether or not we're in favour of pensioners living in dignity in this coming period, and whether or not we can ensure that they can turn on the heating, whether or not they can have some decent quality of life level, whether or not we can not lift more pensioners out of poverty, but we can prevent more falling into poverty. That's what I think this decision is all about, and that's why I support these amendments. It cannot be right that on the one hand we are cutting taxes to corporations, introducing tax breaks, and yet at the same time preventing pensioners having a basic decent pension. Final point from me is I hear the Minister's reassurances that this is for 1 year only. I've been in this House too long where we've been promised something for 1 year only and suddenly they become permanent, and that's the big fear out there, that actually there'll be another special circumstance next year and then the year after. And as my honourable friend has pointed out, we will lose the commitment that was given a number of years ago that there would be this continuous link with earnings so that the pensioners of this country would share in the wealth more equitably within our country itself. That's why I support these amendments.